I have made a previous video exploring the relationship between grief and guilt, and I will link to that at the end of this video. But today we are looking at a deep, persistent, and unique nuance of guilt called survivor's guilt. I'm Jo McRogers. I'm a therapist who supports grief. Welcome to Grief Support That Works, and our goal here is to do grief differently. It is important to recognize that grief and guilt have a parasitic relationship. Parasites live off of living organisms, and as a result, they cause harm to the host organism. So think of grief as the organism and guilt as the parasite. I mentioned this in the last video when I talked about grief and the holidays. So first, let's start with a clinical definition of survivor's guilt. The extent and severity of survivor's guilt varies between people, but symptoms of survivor's guilt can be both psychological and physical, and often mimic those of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The most common psychological symptoms of survivor's guilt include feelings of helplessness, flashbacks of the traumatic event, irritability, lack of motivation, mood swings and angry outbursts, obsessive thoughts about the event, sometimes suicidal thoughts. And then the common physical symptoms include appetite changes, difficulty sleeping, headaches, nausea, stomach and gut aches, and a racing heart. The personalized experience of survivor's guilt is described to me from many of my clients as feeling guilt, feeling responsibility or remorse connected to the loss. And these feelings then show up in a cycle or a repeating loop. Individuals often struggle to turn their thoughts to anything else but the sense of guilt, remorse, and responsibility. The implications of survivor's guilt are deep. It is important to note that survivor's guilt is not just an event, it is a process. And the first step in this process is that the suspicion of your complicity or guilt in either the death or the inability to prevent the death or to have directed its journey differently, the why them and not me, it occupies your mind, it replays, it includes flashbacks, it persists with unanswerable questions. And this guilt is a frequent experience of grievers. However, where this change into survivor's guilt comes is that those thoughts stop existing as a wondering, and they then become concrete beliefs. How could I have changed this? Turns into a fixed belief of I failed to change this. The why them and not me becomes a belief that it should have been me judgment. And this is the second nuance of survivor's guilt, that fixed beliefs of self-judgment are paramount. So, along with guilty feelings of personal responsibility for the event or its outcome, even when you couldn't have done anything to change what would have happened, survivor's guilt involves distorted or extreme negative beliefs about yourself and the world in general. Survivor's guilt brings people to believe that they might see themselves as a bad person, and they may believe that they deserve some kind of punishment. They may come to believe that you can't trust anyone or any system, and they may question their spiritual beliefs. They may consider the world wholly unjust and a dangerous place as a permanent belief. Individuals experiencing survivor's guilt become finely tuned to seek for evidence and support to reinforce these negative self-judgments. So intrusive thoughts are on constant loops, seeking for proof of your guilt. This rumination cycle is influenced by what is known as hindsight bias. It is normal for people to look back and overestimate our own ability to have power over the loss or to have been able to predict the outcome of an event. And because we feel like we should have been able to predict what happened, we become convinced that we also should have been able to change the outcome. This illustrates the depth of the distortion and the lack of logic that actually exists in survivor's guilt. And yet it is so real and tangible. Having listened to these definitions and these experiences, tell me, is it possible that you might be experiencing survivor's guilt? Please comment below so that we can share perspectives and normalize this as a dimension of grief. So not everyone experiences survivor's guilt, so it's important to look at who might be most susceptible to experiencing survivor's guilt. Some research has indicated that experiencing trauma during childhood can increase the likelihood of feeling negative emotions following other life-changing events, such as the death of a loved one. So past trauma is an indicator or a vulnerability to survivor's guilt. Research also shows that a history of depression in the past, people who are depressed who have experienced it in the past, may also be more likely to experience guilt and anxiety following the trauma of the death of a loved one, which can then translate into survivor's guilt. Self-esteem is also an important determinant. People with low self-esteem may place less value on their own well-being. So when faced with the experience of surviving where others have perished, they may be more likely to question whether they deserved their good luck of surviving. Lack of social support is also an important indicator. People who do not have a solid network of social support may be more likely to experience symptoms related to survivor's guilt. And one of the final risk or vulnerability indicators is a lack of professional support. Early professional support can challenge this sequence of emotional demise. Early intervention can prevent the free fall of survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt builds exponentially. The longer and deeper that the survivor's guilt exists, the likelihood of challenging these distorted thoughts diminishes. Survivor's guilt worsens with time. Nothing about survivor's guilt shifts casually. So, please know, your thoughts are not facts. Your emotions are not facts. Please don't believe everything that grief is telling you. What you feel responsible for and what you have actually been responsible for are two very different lists. Please make your lists, contrast and compare them. Find some distance and perspective if you can. And if you can't, please seek help. Grief is a sneaky bastard. Do not trust it. Please seek help if you are experiencing survivor's guilt. The run-on thoughts and the cadence of survivor's guilt needs support. I send you kind thoughts, kind words, and a kind heart as you work to recognize this guilt parasite within your grief. Thank you and take good care.